and welcome everybody to our webinar partnered by HICX. Today's session forms part of our Q3 series looking at planning for 2022 and how the boldest, most effective procurement strategies will empower your business success. So throughout the series, our partners and experts will look at how to move beyond the crisis, innovate, and empower their business for success during these uncertain times. My name is Caroline Dillon. I manage content for procurement leaders, and I am absolutely delighted today to be joined by a really great panel. We have Dr. Elouise Epstein, partner at Kearney, and we have Costas Xyloyiannis, co-founder and CEO at HICX. So I'm absolutely delighted to have you guys here. Today, as I was saying, this is a part of a series, but we are going to focus more specifically on how to enable the best-of-breed ProcureTech. So what do we mean by this? As you can see on your screen, we are going to look at various areas, but primarily at these 3 points. We're going to look at, the drivers towards best of breed in the ProcureTech landscape. We're going to look at challenges, this raises for organizations in terms of integration, data, user experience, and we're going to look at, the emergence of the enterprise-wide experience portal. So before we start, I would like to draw your attention to a few of the icons that you can all see on your screen. So you have the Q&A and help icon. Those are the main 2 ones that I want you to pay attention to. The help icon, obviously, if you have any technical issues at any point, please, get in touch with us through that. We will do our best to help you out. And the Q&A icon, this is how you are going to put your questions forward to our panel today. Do not wait until the end of the session. We want to hear from you. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have a burning question at any point, please put it in there and we'll get to it as soon as we can. So to help us, offer you guys a little bit of context, we'll be starting with 2 positioning pieces from our experts, and we're going to be starting with Elouise. So Elouise, I'm going to pass it on to you, and thank you again so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Just to level set, I am a partner with Kearney. I just published a book quite literally on this topic, on best of breed. And as you will see in my content here for the next few minutes, this is what I espouse. This is what I believe. This is what I help clients with. And I tend to work with clients that are either extreme leaders or extreme laggards. And if you're an extreme leader, you're really trying to push the boundaries and make use of all this best of breed technology. And if you're a laggard, you tend to find yourself in a difficult position. You tend to want to leapfrog to the future. And so that's what I help my clients with. I'll reference the book a number of times. I just wanted to put it in there. I'm not trying to sell it. I don't make any money off of it. But if you are interested in learning more, I spent the last year writing a book about this topic. So anyway, we find ourselves going into 2022 with all kinds of macro risks. I'll close at the end, and if I forget, somebody can remind me of what I will predict the next big disruption is, because it's coming. We have new ways of working. That's obvious. We've learned all of a sudden that we can work from home, that the office is no longer the place to be, which requires an even greater level of digital competency. Innovations, our digital innovations are coming. They're here. It's an explosion. I'm going to talk about that extensively. And we are operating in a new business environment where the biggest enterprises grow through mergers and acquisitions, and an increasing amount of companies are under private equity ownership or private ownership. And so the business environments we find ourselves in are vastly different than the way many of us, than they were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when a lot of us were coming into the industry. So in parallel to that, we have this procurement in particular, but most enterprise functions are getting more, they're getting smarter, speedier, smaller, the 3 S's as we call it. But what that means is for procurement, we need to get more strategic. and stop doing tactical and operational procurement. Now, the cynics in the audience I know will say, well, a whole series of consultants have come in for the last decade and promised this, and it's failed to materialize. And that is true, and we're no different. But what's different now is digital has arrived for procurement. There is no excuse. There's no excuse for the complexity argument. There's no excuse for we're an SAP shop, quote unquote. Now is our time for procurement. I often say that now is the greatest time to be in procurement, and it's because technology has arrived, digital has arrived for procurement, and it's driving this path to the strategic procurement we all dreamed about for the last decade or two. And yet we find ourselves stuck in the old paradigm, the old upstream, downstream construct. And this no longer works because it took the pandemic to really blow this out of the water. Although we saw this with the trade wars, at least in the North America-China trade wars, or I should say the America-China trade wars, this process, this structure does not work. And I will take the blame on behalf of Kearney because we were the ones espousing this idea that you could have this very rigid SRM and then go into sourcing and contract management. First of all, it never stuck. We all follow it, but it never stuck because we didn't have the technology to make it work. But also, it doesnn't reflect, back what I was saying, this new business environment, it does not reflect the way we operate now. Because imagine the pandemic hit, all of a sudden we were scrambling for PPE, hand sanitizer, janitorial services, et cetera. Well, you're not going to run the traditional process for that. Everything you're throwing bodies at the problem because this process broke down. And even if this process was the right one, the technology historically has failed to deliver. And you can read 1 through 10 at the bottom. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. So, and if we look at this architecturally from a technology point of view, I've taken the same construct and just put it into a architecture map, and we use the Harvey balls to assess maturity, and this is in aggregate across industries, but when I do it by particular industries, it is relatively the same. We are still shockingly immature at data management. We are supplier relationship management, process automation, category management. All of these core things we are struggling with as a function collectively. What's even worse about this is that we're going backwards. I find in spend visibility, contract management, and sourcing, we are now going backwards. And part of that is related to the M&A and moving to private ownership that I was talking about. So there are these disruptors out there, just in terms of we need to get better at our maturity. And I will just flag real quick that the digital experience, the idea that we have portals and catalogs and punch outs, like those are concepts and technology from the 90s, the 1990s. We're in 2021 and going into 2022. We need to move beyond that. We need to bring procurement technology to where the user is. We need to use intelligence to make that user experience much better. I could spend a whole hour on that topic, but we have a big zero in terms of maturity on digital experience. So keep that in mind as we go forward. So how do we get here? Well, we got here because the Big Six, used to be the Big Seven, for those that remember MTORUS, came and said they took that process that very clear, clean end-to-end process and said, hey, here's the technology that'll enable that. But if you look at them all together and sort of evaluate them, and we can quibble about, every time I show this, people will say, well, so-and-so is better at this, and it doesn't really matter. It's all mediocre. And we know it's mediocre because very, very, very few companies have ever successfully deployed an end-to-end suite to underpin the entire procurement value chain. And we also know that this has failed to deliver because there has been an explosion, and I don't mean a little explosion, I mean an explosion of procurement technology over the last 4 or 5 years. I've been giving variations of this, or putting this message out there for the last 4 years, culminating in the book. And we have gone from $500 million in venture capital funding to close somewhere between $2 and $3 billion. I have honestly, it's exceeded what I can track. And so what you can see now is you have these best of breeds that, which is the topic of today, has exploded. None of these solutions would exist if the big six would have delivered on their promise. And so we have just this great amount of innovation happening. And so my argument, my fundamental argument, my entire book is based on this next slide, and many of you have seen this, is we need a new architecture. And a new architecture that is for the future. It is for the next decade. And this, I did not come up with this. This is how Salesforce works. This is how Apple iOS works. This is how Android works. It's this idea that you have this ecosystem, or sorry, this hub or this platform that enables an ecosystem of apps, if you will, that are connected, which means it has several implications. One is we now need to look at who's going to be the platform provider. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then we also have to look at, we have to get comfortable with the complexity that we might have more than just one provider. We actually might have 10, 20, 30 providers. That should be fine because sales and marketing will have 200 different apps within the Salesforce construct. How many apps do you have on your phone? Do you really know? Does it really matter? I just need to go to Venmo or whatever, Waze or Uber. And so we are familiar with this complexity. We're just not familiar with it in a procurement context. And this is how high tech, I'm here in the Bay Area, so Netflix, Facebook, Google, Amazon, they all use this architecture. And now it's coming to procurement. It's our time. This is why it's great. So as this architecture comes, then we will get the benefits. Which means, and then, so if you look, the really important thing is, if you could take away all the logos on this page, is the labels. And I want to draw your attention to the labels, because the labels, that's the procurement value chain deconstructed. And it's all those boxes that I showed you in that end-to-end process, but I've blown them out because we need all these capabilities. And oh, by the way, there's a whole series of other capabilities that are coming that we haven't even gotten to yet. So there's white space in and around this. I've just run out of space on the literal slide. And so that gets us to who's going to be this center hub. And of the big six, only 2 are legitimately positioned to get to that next level. And that doesn't even guarantee they'll get there. That just means they have a shot at it. And I'm just going to talk about you all see it. There are startups that are now stepping into this center space and making a play. HICX is absolutely one of them, which is why I'm here doing this webinar, because they have, when I see some technology that actually fits this vision, I explore it with them and really try to understand it. And what HICX does with this, and this is not a sales, I'm just explaining in the context of my ecosystem, but is this idea of low code or this integration, where this app store integration. And when a vendor like HICX is doing this, or Supplier is doing it for your intelligence, what we're trying to get is this aggregated view and make it simple, so we don't have to deal with this as technology. So again, I could probably spend an hour. I do often spend an hour on this slide. I will keep going in the interest of time. But the point is, we need a new architecture, which means as you think about your digital strategies going into 2022, you need to look at this in terms of capabilities. These are the capabilities you need. And I've color-coded them in terms of prioritization. Every company is different. And also by industry, there's different versions of this by industry. But the point is once we start looking at the functionality we need, we start prioritizing in different ways. And contracting is a good example, because typically, historically, consultants will come in and tell you, Oh, you have to do CLM. You have to do the repository. You have to do thresholds. You have to do workflows, routing, approvals. All really good things. But if you spend 18 months and several $1 million on consultants to define all this and code all this, after 18 months, you've delivered zero value to the business. You've gone through an intellectual exercise for procurement, a good governance exercise, but nothing to help the business. Whereas if we flip the paradigm and say, get all of our contracts together, doesn't even have to be a single repository. We put some analytics on top of it. Guess what? All of a sudden, we can start to extract insights from our contracts of how complex they are, where we have risk, where we have pricing mismatches, and start to enable our category commodity managers and the business itself. And by making that flip, it allows us to get just a simple flip in terms of phasing. We actually can create value now. And the time to value in what I'm talking about here, when we talk about best of breed, the time to value should be 3 to 6 weeks, not 3 to 5 years. And this is the critical takeaway. So if you take nothing else away, time to value measured in 3 to 6 weeks. And so by doing this and getting very precise, we can do that instead of trying to solve the whole thing. So I'll leave you with just 2 quick thoughts before I pass off to Costas. As you think about evaluating software, you're going to need to evaluate it on new criteria. Forget the 300 question RFPs. Those are useless. I don't care how many 68 different auction types, irrelevant. I need the 5 that are relevant to my business. And we need that precision, that consumerization, personalization that we have. So here are your 6 guiding principles to evaluate any tech provider against. And then I won't go through them because you can read them afterwards. And if we get digital and agile right, I'll just leave you with this thought, is that we start to change how we operate our entire procurement organization. And that's why I set up at the beginning is as we're working in this new environment, we need digital and this agile way of working to inform everything we do, whether it's the type of people we hire, the governance we do, the strategies we set, and the processes. Because by the way, when the next disruption hits, it's going to require us to work in the same way we have over the last 16 months. And this slide is just included in the pack in case you want to understand where you are in terms of maturity. So with that, I'm going to pass off to Costas and let him run you through the next bit.
Thanks, Elouise. Always very exciting to hear this message. Also very validating of sort of the last 6 years of our journey. Now, I want to get into a little bit more detail. So first of all, why should we bother with best of breed? Because I think historically there have been challenges with that. First of all, set the stage, suppliers touch everyone. And we have so many of them, but it touches the CEO, right, who could be buying, McKinsey. It touches someone in production. It touches someone in marketing and R&D, et cetera. And we're heavily, heavily dependent on these suppliers, and we've also seen that with the pandemic. Also, we see a lot of different use cases are coming up, right? And that's also validated with the spider diagram, which Elouise just showed. But we have a lot of new use cases, right? Sustainability, carbon monitoring, conflict minerals. Germany launched a new supply chain regulation. And there is an expectation that you are using digital platforms to solve these use cases, right? We are in the digital era. No one is expecting you to do anything different. So that expectation is there. And for us, best of breed is in a way inevitable. Similarly, Elouise has said a lot of the same things, but if one system was going to solve it, ERP tried to do it 50 years ago. The suite kind of tried to do it, 20 years ago. And yet here we are, right? So the view is we can either plan for best of breed or it will happen, right? Now, we do need to address the challenges head on because there is, I'd say, negative stigma historically, and I'm going to talk to that in a moment. But key challenges when we think of best of breed is the data part, supplier data. How are we going to maintain the same consistent version of our data across all of these systems? Data management is an area which has low competency historically. Integration, I think when anyone thinks of best of breed, one of the drawbacks we've seen from, or at least people perceive it, is, oh, how am I going to connect all these systems, right? They see it as a massive challenge. And then we have to address the idea of the experience, right? So if we have many systems, how are we going to make sure that the supplier experience is not negatively impacted, right? But there are ways to address all of these challenges. One key thing which we want to demystify, because again, people think best of breed might be this Frankenstein monster. And I think there's a bit of a confused way of how people look at best of breed, right? And it says it on the slide, but random acquisition of software to address specific problems is not a best of breed strategy, right? It's not planning for it. It's letting it happen, which is what's the road a lot of organizations have ended up. Everyone wanted a single solution, and then over time, oh, well, it can't do that, let's buy that. Can't do that, let's buy this, right? So they never plan for it, right? And this is not a best of breed strategy. We need to plan for it, and then we can be very successful with this approach. Now, to provide a little bit of color, I've actually listed here a couple examples from actual large organizations. And what you'll see is, a lot of different processes which are going to touch our suppliers along the way. And there's going to be a lot of different tools which are going to be used cross-functionally. Sometimes for good reason, sometimes for bad reason, but it's very natural, right? You will see that almost always, for example, you'll never have indirect and direct from the same platform, right? They tend to be not very good. It's very different use cases, right? So this idea that we'll land on one solution never actually happens. And this kind of landscape tends to be where a lot of organizations are today. Now, what challenges does this landscape have? We have two main challenges we think of typically. So number one is supplier data. And the key issues here to address this is, first of all, ownership. Okay, there's so many cross-functional elements to this. So you will have shared service functions, you'll have procurement, you'll have finance, you'll have compliance. And no one owns the whole thing, but everyone owns a lot of different parts of it, okay? Then integration. Historically, again, people believe that this is really difficult, costly to maintain, all of these kind of things. In reality, by the way, integration in itself has been around many years. Technologically, it's not difficult. Okay, the reason it becomes challenging is the data, okay? Then data quality, when you have all of these solutions, every time you add a solution, you're going to add potentially the risk of creating bad data which is not governed. And the challenge with that is there's a lot of variation and volatility. What we mean by that is, a lot of different types of suppliers, a lot of different use cases, a lot of people touching the data, having to change the data all the time. So this makes it something which, for many organizations, is a very big challenge to solve. The other part, which you don't want to brush under the carpet, is this fragmented and inefficient supplier experience, right? So there's a lot of burden which is being placed on the user, internal, and suppliers to go and actually figure out, right, which system should I use? When should I use it? A lot of portals, a lot of networks, which, by the way, over time have also gotten polluted data, a lot of different logins. We do things many, many times, okay, which, of course, is inefficient for the supplier, but it's inefficient also for us internally. And it's very difficult to join up all these things. So ultimately, this is inhibiting us even from doing those new initiatives, right? And diluting the value of the actual best-of-breed systems and adoption. From our point of view, what people now are looking to do is to connect the experience. We don't want to replace the systems, because back to what we've said, it's no one can be good at everything, right? It's just technology is moving way too quickly, and not everybody needs the same solution. The idea is, can we orchestrate a unified experience, right? So if the supplier needs to see their invoices, it doesn't matter if they're, in Tungsten and Coupa or Ariba, you can aggregate that, right? They can have a view. If they want to submit it, you can guide them to the right place. And there will be good reasons, by the way, if I take on that example, why people use different payment networks. Because for some regions, actually, the payment network is much, much better and has the suppliers there, right? So there are good reasons to do that. So when we talk about unifying this experience, we don't want to replace those systems. We want to orchestrate and have the ability to create those unique and tailored experiences across our landscape. How do you do that? Well, we need to think about it like that. So if we take the example we had of our landscape, so typical landscape, we should think about it of having to shrink wrap things and abstract this complexity. And the way we do that is the experience portal, which I just shared, but we can't enable an easy way to orchestrate if we don't have the data and the logic layer, right, as the foundation. Because critical to being able to make this plug and play, we have to have the data flowing between systems. It has to somehow be holistically governed. And that foundation, though, if we establish that, actually orchestrating experiences becomes far more straightforward with a no-code kind of approach. We always say that success starts with the right hierarchy and data model, and this is about creating that foundation in data management. Where a lot of companies have, let's say, fallen into the trap is, they were led down this path of, use the digital core, right? So AKA the ERP or the suite. Now, the problem with these digital cores and most of these systems is they're transactional systems, okay? So, and we do much more with our suppliers than just transact. And a transactional system, is optimized to allow you to order in a very automated way, to pay, to invoice, to ship, all of those kind of things. But our use cases are growing, and sometimes we want to do something at a parent company. Sometimes a contract is with a legal entity. So we need to look at it holistically and actually not think that, the source of truth is our ERP or a suite, right? We need something externally, which is establishing that foundation and understanding that the ERP or the suite is just another transactional system which we want to connect, right? And our world shouldn't be centered around these elements. But getting this correct sets us off on the right path to connect our landscape. Few key considerations when we think around supplier data and how to do this successfully. The starting point is got to be to control the entry point. You cannot deal with the data challenge if you don't have a single front door, no exceptions of how suppliers and supplier data is created within the company, okay? Because this is the starting point of everything. As soon as you do something wrongly, that is going to stay for years. And for us, you're going to accumulate, if I borrow a term from the software industry, a technical debt. I call it a data debt. And the longer you allow this to happen, that debt is just growing and growing and growing. So step one, we have to control the entry point. Then we need a complete record of our suppliers for 100% of our suppliers. And that's the previous slide, right? We don't just want the transacting data. We have to look at it holistically. This ecosystem then has to be fully integrated and automated. If you don't do that, you're opening up Pandora's box in a way that data will start to get out of sync, and the efforts which we initially do will start to go to waste. The other part then is when we think about onboarding, supplier onboarding for us has become, in a way, a bit of a confused concept because a lot of people do onboarding in their procurement suite, but generally they onboard to procure. And when we talk to a lot of organizations, they mean, oh yes, you mean that onboarding, but there we don't own that. We have to include quality and compliance and, in this team and that team. We're just looking at our little part. In reality, you have to think end to end. When we onboard that supplier, we want to onboard them and enable them in Coupa and in the ERP and in Tungsten and wherever they have to be, right? It has to be an enterprise onboarding, not just for procurement, but for the whole enterprise. And then you have to always think that you're going to need a no-code, low-code, flexible capability because requirements are going to change over time. You're going to come up with new use cases which we haven't come up with before, and you have to be able to adapt, right, and be agile around this. The more interesting element, though, is the one-to-one experience. So when you think about the experience, the challenge today is we're not creating a one-to-one supplier experience. And I'm going to use a little example which actually came from one of our employees, but to kind of illustrate this. So, you know, his mom owns a flower shop, which we all have heard about the flower shop around the corner in procurement. But in this case, you know, they were dealing with a lot of big global funeral houses, and a new initiative came out to support local businesses. And in order to drive this initiative, this company sent out this big 35-page questionnaire to the florist, right? What happened here is, you know, 90% of that was obviously not applicable, right, to them. It was a one-size-fits-all, and half of that more so didn't matter. What actually happened here is there isn't a lot of margins in the flower business. They severed that customer relationship because at the end of the day, if you make life too complicated, suppliers actually will go away, right? There has to be a business case for them to stay in business. And in reality, the good suppliers have choice of customer, right? So you need to look at it from a tailored experience. For us, this is going to drive huge efficiency, both internally and for the supplier, because if not, to be honest, you have to support that complexity. It's going to give you much, much better compliance, okay? Think about it this way, because you can go very detailed when you need to, you can go very lean and fast when you don't. You're going to have significantly better data. Again, if you tailor it, better experience yields better data, and actually better data yields a better experience. So for us, this is kind of a flywheel around the data. In turn, we have much better visibility, much better controls around our risk. We're removing a lot of admin burden from our ecosystem internally and from suppliers. This means we're actually allowing and creating an environment where innovation can happen. So we need to think about it that let's set up our suppliers and create that experience which allows everyone to do their best work. A few closing thoughts before we hand over back to Caroline here is we have to consider the mandate, which I think is a big gap in a lot of organizations. Now, Elouise talked about the leaders, and the leaders actually have created functions with this mandate, but most organizations actually still have these silos, right? And here we have some examples. You know, if I take Treasury, you know, Treasury cares about the bank account, right? Okay, if we take category managers, you know, they want to know that their data is correct. If it's not correct, they don't want to be the one to fix it, but they care about that, right? So everyone is owning different parts of these problems, but the key problem we see is no one owns end-to-end. You know, no one owns the problem of solving a bad experience or establishing the framework for data foundation and data management from an end-to-end point of view. And that's got to be the starting point, right? Someone has to own the problem. And for us, that has to sit in procurement. They'll be the catalyst, right, who can drive this forward, but we need the mandate to be able to do that. Without a mandate and without creating that kind of function, we will still continue to operate in our silos. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Caroline. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Costas. Thank you, Elouise. And yeah, great positioning pieces. So now, audience, you know, you've got all of the initial information and in-depth information, I should say. So if you have any questions, now's your chance. I have a couple for the panel, but we do want to hear from you. So please, by all means, post your questions. So I think whilst we're waiting for the audience to put their questions through, I would like to take us a little bit back. You know, the two of you made some really good points throughout both of your presentations. And maybe, Costas, we could start with you with this one. You know, the description of, you know, the user experience, I think it probably may have come across as quite familiar to some people because obviously, you know, supplier portals, they're not a new concept. But what's changed? What's different this time? And maybe, you know, why have things not been, you know, successful, if that makes sense, in the past? So maybe we can start with you, Costas, and then Elouise.
Yeah. So I think, you know, we throw the term of a supplier portal in a very generic manner and not necessarily defining it, but I think there's two portals when people think about that. Sometimes, for many people, when you say supplier portal, It can actually just be a portal on our corporate website with an amalgamation of information and links. But actually, that is one of the bad experiences, and we've faced it as a supplier. What this means is, here's a lot of information, supplier. Go and read it and figure out where you need to go, what you need to do. And that just opens it up for error, right? Because again, you're leaving it up to interpretation. The other portal, obviously, almost all of these best-of-breed solutions might have a front end for supplier to collaborate or be part of that use case, right? But it's not necessarily a holistic portal. What we're looking at here is orchestrating the experience, right? And why it hasn't succeeded is no one's looked at the data foundation, right? They want to think, oh, we just need the portal, but actually not thinking, well, what do I need to enable that, orchestration of the experience?
Yeah, definitely. Elouise, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I would just echo what Costas said. I think it's taking the intelligence, the idea that we make people go, whether it's your business, your requisitioners, your business users, go to a place, sort through everything, search through, click. This is my issue with bad requisitioning systems, is you get to search through 15 different screens only to find what you want is not there, not in stock. And then you have to kick off a PR. What we need is to use the intelligence and either drive them to that PR quicker and take the burden off of them. Or similarly with suppliers, don't make them read through all that documentation, synthesize it, deliver it to them in a way that is useful and actionable. And too often we have historically made a portal, made it a dumping ground, and put the onus on the user to figure it all out.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, that's actually a really good point. And you have both made some really good points in terms of, the advantage of the best of breed solutions. But quite often our members, they start asking, okay, well, if we already have a supplier's portal, within the S2P suite, like, why would we want to add anything on top of this? Yourself, Costas, you were talking about trying to simplify things. So what's the reasoning there? And Costas, I'll pass it on to you first, and then Elouise.
Yeah, hopefully a little bit of the information shared by Elouise also explains this. But for us, the main issue is they'll never cover all the use cases, right? That is first and foremost one of the big challenges. And a lot of customers always have a few of these, right? They don't just have one. And they're geared around transacting. So generally the data and how they store the data doesn't fit for the other use cases. A lot of them have networks. And whilst networks from an idealistic point of view are beautiful, unless there's one network, it's actually quite a painful process, and they're quite polluted with data, right? So it's actually quite challenging to get set up. We've faced this when we have to go onto these networks, because we'll find, HICX already exists a million times because it's been created by a bunch of other customers. So I think these challenges have led people away from this to just see it that, yes, it's there to collaborate, for P2P, for those things, but it's not going to cover all of our use cases.
Yeah, that's fair enough. What are your thoughts, Elouise, on this?
Again, it sounds like just echo. It's impossible to the way we've done. Let me rephrase that. The way we've done it before just doesn't work. So regardless of whether you agree with what we're saying or not, there is an overwhelming amount of evidence to say that the past way we've done it doesn't work. I come in, Kearney is one of the most expensive management consulting firms in the world. You don't hire us to implement one of the traditional providers. You only hire us when there's either a huge opportunity or a huge problem. And I've built my career coming in off the back of failed S2P implementations. So I have seen this, and we have to, it's abundantly clear that we have to do something different. And also the way I contextualized this at the beginning, we're in a different environment. The technology is moving much more fast, and the way the business is moving, the expectations, like sustainability, Costas had mentioned this, like all of a sudden in the last, call it 18 months, it has rocketed to the top. Diverse suppliers has rocketed to the top of the agenda, and all of a sudden we're scrambling. We can't, you're not going to bake that into an existing system. We need to get these things going, and we need that data, we need that flexibility, we need that agility.
Yeah, definitely. And, we're getting quite a few really good questions from the audience. So I would like to take us to that. We've got quite a few questions looking, at technology and how it may change, the day-to-day, procurement needs, basically, and also we have quite a lot of questions regarding the skill sets, that's required for this. So I was wondering, and maybe, Elouise, because, we bounced on that a little bit with you, maybe we can start with you for this one, but I'm quite curious to hear your thoughts in terms of, the role of IT, that the role IT plays in the scenario that we've discussed today, the role of technology. What skill sets do our audience need? What resources do they need to put in place? So, any advice for our audience on this?
So number one, intellectual curiosity. Too often, and actually this, I'll get to skills, but I'll backtrack. Too often, the procurement technology has been managed by half an FTE. Somebody to manage the S2P contract. Somebody put in the chat, the one throat to choke. That's not digital. That's just doing the minimal, if even that. You need a team, or actually your entire team, to be digitally comfortable. And somebody put in the chat, complexity. There is complexity. There's complexity for the procurement group. The end users will never see, if we do this right, the end users will never see this complexity. So that's one thing. And so in terms of skills, we need intellectual curiosity and to be able to design the factory. Right now, when we do PO approvals and invoice reconciliation and managing catalogs, we're basically bolting together parts of the car on the assembly line, which robots can do much faster. And we don't build factories with humans doing everything on the lines. We obviously put in a lot of robotics to bring that together. And so as humans, we design the factories, we design the supply chains or the networks of the interconnectivity between all of them. And so as procurement, we need that same idea. We need to be able to take this and bring this in. So you need that intellectual curiosity, this sort of, I hate to use the term design thinking, but the ability to think about what we could be or should be doing. And then we have to be comfortable with data and asking questions of data. We have, as procurement function, we've skated by ignoring data for too long or just taking a very narrow sliver. The fact that the biggest castigation is the fact that most people don't believe our numbers. If that doesn't send warning bells to everybody and get us like panicked, we should be very panicked when people don't believe the numbers, because the numbers are the numbers. And so if we can't agree on savings, we can't agree on or what we're spending and where, we have a problem. So we have to be much more conversant with data. And similarly, when we want to be part of the business, we want the quote unquote seat at the table. Great. We should have a seat at the table. But if you get the seat at the table, you better bring some value. How many procurement people, whether it's the CPO or the actual people on the ground working with the business, show up to the meeting and add zero value? That's a negative for all of us. So again, you need to be able to bring the data, be able to ask the questions in advance, and actually proactively work, because the greatest challenges for procurement over the next decade, sustainability, diverse suppliers, innovation, et cetera, they're not going to come from approving invoices or making the buying process more difficult. It's going to be because we're working with the business. So the third skill, if you're keeping track, intellectual curiosity, data comfortability, data and analytics. And the other one is business agility and the ability to put ourselves in the business's shoes, to not say, no, you can't do that, to say, oh, let's work together to figure out how best to do that. We need recyclable straws. Great, let's work to find that supplier because I can help you. I'm not going to hurt you. And just a bonus, long form, short form writing and presentation skills are also important because that ties everything together. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, but it was a really good one, and it gave a brilliant view of all of the skill set that's required. And actually, that links us quite nicely to the next question. Costas, you mentioned this in your presentation, and we do have some questions about it from the audience. It's this idea of ownership. You touched upon it a little bit there in your presentation, but it's obviously the importance of the ownership of the supplier experience, and some of the challenges organizations have because no single person or team has that end-to-end ownership of the supplier data or the supplier experience. And Elouise, you just mentioned this, the importance of that data, within the implementation of a best-of-breed solution. So, Costas, I'm quite curious to hear your thoughts. What thoughts do you have in terms of overcoming this issue of ownership? I mean, is this a question of even inventing a new role, or what's the solution here?
So, short answer is going to be probably yes. We don't know what that role is called, but I think ownership has generally been a problem in a few areas. So, Elouise mentioned this. Procurement has not taken ownership of their data. I can't tell you how many times you talk to people where people will complain about the problem but don't feel that it's their problem to solve. And in fact, this has actually created the situation where IT tries to solve the data problem, which for me is wrong because in the end they put these kind of MDM solutions which are very IT-centered and actually don't deliver the business value because they're disconnected from the actual business processes, right? It's again some siloed function which doesn't understand how data will be used. So for us, when we think and why we thought about the supplier experience, it's more design thinking and flipping a common problem, but looking at it from another point of view. So if we look at it from the external point of view, our view is it's going to help us to solve an internal challenge with data, by the way. So, but to solve a problem, you have to have someone who, feels the pain or has the mandate to solve that. And today, there is no one in general who's heading up that supplier experience, right? Who can say, no, don't buy this system, or yes, let's buy this system because it's going to improve the supplier experience, et cetera, right? So no one has this mandate to go end to end. They tend to be procurement focused. They don't own the quality process, the compliance process. These can sit in other functions. So someone needs to have that so they can also establish the framework, right, of how we're going to do this. How do we, get the right data, et cetera. So yeah, totally, for me, we should create a new role and someone should own the supplier experience to help us drive this kind of transformation.
Yeah, definitely. And we've got actually, that leads quite nicely with what you were mentioning there, Costas, and this one may be more for you, Elouise. We've got Nile who is saying that they're a part of a large multinational organizations that have a dedicated data and analytics function, specializing in data lakes, automation, visualizations, and many more. And upon sharing their thoughts of digitizing procurement, they were informed that procurement is not even on the roadmap, and that they cannot assign any resources. So at the moment, that's a huge challenge for them, and that that the real challenge is that buy-in, to get that buy-in for these ideas and to get that procurement data and analytics prioritized. I mean, I know that this concept of buy-in is a huge challenge. So what are your thoughts on this? What would you like to advise here?
Yeah, I mean, this gets back to so influencing, and this I am not afraid to challenge CPOs to do better leadership, to be better leaders. If you're an enterprise, and I can guarantee you cost savings, an additional 10, 20, 30% cost savings by focusing on this, why wouldn't you do that? Why is that not on the executive agenda? To say nothing of, again, sustainability, diversity, innovation, et cetera. That's like a hugely compelling value proposition. And so, because the return on investments to procurement is huge. So if we're not getting those resources allocated, it means we're not making the case. So when I was talking about long form, short form, and presentation skills, not only do we need them as collective folks, but our leaders need them. And if they're not exhibiting those, then they're not doing their job. The second part of that is we think about supplier relationship management as just, and it's kind of a misnomer because it's literally meant to be external third parties. But in procurement, we also need to look at that internally, and because what do we oftentimes in big multinationals, AP or finance is separate, legal is always separate, and other business entities are separate. So why would we not take that relationship management to our other functions, IT in particular in this case, and work with them and try to get them going, get them on board and with this concept. And I often find that it's less about, and I'm not dismissing your question, but oftentimes procurement doesn't even know what to ask for because these data lakes will exist, these capabilities will exist, and procurement will never ask them and tell them what they need. Because if you tell them what you need, they might be able to provide it. And then the alternative is if they won't provide it, go outside. And there are tons of providers, that the intelligence providers, give them your data. And not only will they clean, harmonize your data, but they'll embed it with benchmark data and external data. So you can bypass IT very quickly in this. And I know that's a trite answer, but because there's impediments to doing that. But taken together, this is relationship management, and it's refusing to accept what IT says.
Brilliant. And Costas, I'm quite curious, what are your thoughts on this? What have you seen on your side of the market?
So my thoughts, first of all, I think the ownership of defining these requirements should sit with the function. So procurement, I'm never a fan of these central data teams. Now that may be controversial to others, and we're focused always on the data lakes and the outputs and buzzwords. But if you think of any kind of AI project, ML project, all these things, you'll see research says like 90% of the time is spent on fixing the data. And people forget about this, right? They're just focused on one in and output without looking at those inputs. And we look at data management in two ways. So there's the analytical side, and people are doing this, and this is fine, but there's also the operational side, fixing the data in your operational systems, which actually drives things forward, right? And rarely are people trying to address this, right? They want to, pull the data out and fix it out there, but we're not fixing the root cause of the problem. So our view is we need to focus on the root cause here. And procurement can own that destiny around data and analytics themselves, right? I don't think it should be a shared function. I think that requirement is understood by the business, and oftentimes you have people creating these data and analytics functions, and eventually they don't deliver what the business needs because they were not involved. It's not embedded in the actual business processes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Costas. And we are kind of coming to the end of our session. So what I would like to do, in order to wrap us up, I'm really keen on hearing from the both of you. What, we've mentioned so many different points. We've mentioned so many, all of the skill sets that are needed. The issue of ownership. The issue of actually just getting started right now, like you were saying at the beginning, Elouise. If you were going to give one takeaway for our audience, one call for action for our audience today, what would it be? And Elouise, let's start with you, and then Costas.
Well, what I would say, well, it may not be one, there might be a couple embedded in here, but I genuinely believe that now is the greatest time to be in procurement. Period, end of sentence, end of discussion. And I'll just qualify that by saying, I've been in the procurement field for 21 years, almost 22 years. I'm an old timer. I've watched this. I've been at the ground level of watching us mature as a function and really go from misunderstood to back office to what I think is going to be charting the future. We are at the precipice of charting the future. And the last 16, 17 months has proven that this is our time. This is our time to show our value to the organization. Supply chain operations writ large, everybody now talks about supply chains now, and people notionally understand supply chains now. And we are a huge component of every supply chain. Procurement is, the source function is. And so, and consequently, what you see is a massive amount of investment, like I talked about before. So that means all the great technology and innovation and these discussions and the people are coming into this area. And because I will make a prediction that over the next few years, innovation will really be more about third-party engagement and less about internally funded labs. And so third-party engagement fits squarely into procurement's remit. So not only do we get all this investment for these great tools that are coming our way, and it's an exciting function to be in, but we're also on the ground with where the business is going, whether it's sustainability or ESG or any of those things. We are right there. So it's great time to be in procurement.
Brilliant. Thank you, Elouise. Costas, some last thoughts?
I think last thoughts for me is, the takeaway, or maybe the thought to leave people, and I'll expand a little bit on it, but, for us, best of breed is an inevitability, right? There is a lot of facts out there to show that the old way isn't working, and, you've seen that best of breed is going to happen. So you can either plan for it or let it happen, but it's going to be much more successful if we are planning for it. And the way to enable best of breed for us is focus on data, and let's start looking at problems differently. So that's why we're doing outside in. Let's look at it from the supplier experience, because our perspective is if you join that, you're actually going to fix your data problems inherently, because who are you dependent on all this data, by the way? It's the supplier, right? All these companies actually, for all these initiatives, more and more, they're going to need more and more data from their suppliers. And for some reason, I think people aren't getting this, right? For ESG, for carbon reporting, you pick it, conflict minerals, it's all about getting stuff from your suppliers. So if you're inherently making this difficult and not prioritizing that, you're not really going to solve your data problem, because, again, you're dependent on suppliers actually for data, right? They are that source of truth for you. So, don't let it happen. My recommendation is plan for it. Focus on data, and this is an easy path to enable best of breed.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm afraid, guys, we're out of time. I do apologize. I mean, like Elouise was saying, this is something that we could talk about for hours on end. So, I would like to thank the two of you, first of all, for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you. Any questions, our audience, any questions that we haven't been able to get to, we do apologize, but these will be transferred on to our speakers, and they will attempt, to try and respond. For those who are asking, the recording and the approved slides will indeed be available to you. We will be sending an on-demand link so that you can view the session. If you know of a colleague who has missed the session, please by all means, send them this on-demand link and, start sharing the word. We really want to hear from you. You have a feedback form, so please fill that up. We want to hear, what your thoughts are. We always want to improve our sessions. And finally, as some of you may know, we have launched our H2 events, and this is very exciting. HICX are going to be joining us again in these events. So by all means, please, check our additional resources. We have a few links there regarding the congresses and finding out more about that. If you want to find out more about, the webinars and, the rest of the series, you can find that there as well. And everybody have a great rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much to our partners, HICX, and Costas, Elouise, thank you so much again. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.